let's launch right into the program. And what I'm going to say is what works well on the question and answer is if you have a comment or a question, to send me a chat and I'll monitor it. Let's stick to that rule. And even if you want to interject something, don't worry, you'll get a chance. If you get in line with the chat, sending me a chat, that's going to be the best for everybody. So, so let's talk about today's program. I've been looking forward to this program. I suspect we've all heard of chronic fatigue syndrome, but few of us have an idea of really what it is, and even fewer understand the devastating impact it can have. Our speakers this morning are our classmate Janet Defoe and her husband Ron Davis. You'll probably remember that Ron gave an alumni presentation on the science of chronic fatigue syndrome, and I think it was the 40th reunion.
That was about just genetics, not CFS.
Okay, even better.
Yeah.
So over the past couple months, I've learned a bit more about the disease from Janet and Ron, but a lot more about their incredible dedication to their adult son, Whitney, who was stricken by this disease 8 years ago, and their equally incredible dedication to curing this disease. So Janet and Ron, the stage is yours to tell your story.
Well, first, I'm just thrilled to see everybody and to be doing this and get a chance to spread awareness about this disease. So we had a pretty normal life going on. Ron was working as a scientist and I got my PhD in psychology, and we spent 15 years before we had kids and did traveling. And then we had the beautiful family of Whitney and then Ashley 5 years later. And we were incredibly dedicated to them, did everything with them, went on wonderful trips, rafting down the Colorado River and going to the Galapagos. And we couldn't think of any better way to spend money than to have wonderful experiences with our kids. We practiced Native American spirituality and go to sweat lodges and sun dances, and our kids have been very involved in that. And and then in about you don't expect anything is going to just throw you for a loop. Nobody expects a disaster when it comes. But gradually, after Whitney was in college and establishing himself as a fine arts photographer, he, let's go to the slides now. I have a few slides. Hopefully this will work and you can make the full screen. So that's what, you can all see that?
No, I've got to do share. Where is that? Where is that?
Down at the bottom, Ron, there's a green icon that says share screen.
The whole bottom is blank.
Yeah, I don't
You
know.
need to go back.
Move your cursor down to the bottom and it opens it. You see it then.
No, it's
Nope,
not.
Nope.
Oop. Now what did you do?
Share screen.
The screen is shared.
Yeah, Kathleen Harris, you're sharing your screen. Please unshare it.
That's somebody else's screen. Oh,
That's probably what
Okay.
couldn't share it.
So Ron, take your cursor to the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
And doesn't the icons appear at the bottom of the screen now?
I clicked on share screen and let's see if we can.
Then you've got to click on is that what you wanted to share?
is that
Yeah,
it?
is
A
that a
picture
picture?
of Ron and a baby?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, great. So this is the beginning of Whitney's life, which was somewhat traumatic because there was a knot in the cord, but he regained everything right away. How do you change screens?
Just push that little arrow.
So that's Ron and the baby. Nope. Okay, oh my goodness, maybe it's this arrow.
Which one did you punch? Let's try this one down here. There we go.
Okay, and there's Ron getting one of his prizes for his science, and this time Whitney got to go with him to the ceremony, which was really fun. And this is a little while later when we're visiting Ron's relatives. This is a rope swing that Ron used to swing on when he was a little boy in the farmhouse in Illinois. And that's Whitney when he was healthy. And this is, so in 2000 and let's see, when he graduated from high school in 2001, he had a really bad case of mono. He went to Bennington College, and he, as part of inter semester, between semesters, I forgot what you call that, but he went to Jamaica to build houses in a little mountain community, and he got a really bad headache. And after he got back to Bennington, he was dizzy and felt really weird, but that gradually got better. And then he transferred to San Francisco Art Institute and really started winning awards and things as a fine arts photographer. And he, in 2008, he worked for Obama, and he ran an office in Nevada because he could speak Spanish. And then he went to the inauguration and took amazing photographs of the inauguration. And he made a book for Obama, which he sent to Obama, which is sort of the emotional experience of being at that inauguration and people's faces and things. It's a beautiful little book. And and at that inauguration, he was pretty tired and he didn't really understand what was going on. And then he came back, and he was doing a little job walking around neighborhoods for some environmental group, and he caught a cold, and then he really never got better from that cold. And let's see, I skipped over the fact that in the middle of that, he went to India to build a Tibetan nunnery in Ladakh. And this picture is us sending him off to the airport, about to take him to the airport to go to India. So that's how he looked before his trip to India. He was there 9 months. Towards the end of it, he got really, really sick, and all he could eat was white rice. And he ended up in the hospital in Calcutta, weighing only 115 pounds. And he realized he was going to die if he didn't come home. So he came home. And he gradually got better from that. This is us after that. He wasn't all the way better, but he was gradually getting better. And then we didn't really know what was wrong. And he started going to doctors, and they tried treating him for parasites and told him that it was all psychiatric and that he was just depressed and he needed therapy, and that it was all in his head and he should just exercise more, and a lot of stuff that turned out to be really, really bad advice and ignorant. So then this is a picture when he's pretty sick, but people, and we still didn't know what was wrong. But with this disease, you can go out and have a few minutes or sometimes hours of feeling okay, and then you pay for it, which is called what's called post-exertional malaise, which means that when you put forth any effort, you are it causes your symptoms all to get worse. And a lot of people have to go back and lie down for days to recover from something like going to a birthday party, or as they get worse, it's just even brushing your teeth can cause you to be able to rest before you could get up and wash the dishes, or you have to choose between, brushing your teeth or washing your dishes. And he just kept getting worse. And this is a little later, but in 2000, so in 2009, when we were all about 60, and I was having a mastectomy, which I'm all fine from now. I asked him if he'd come to the hospital and just sit with his dad while I was having this extensive surgery and reconstruction and stuff. And he said, I just don't think I can do that. And I was like, what? You can't come sit with your dad, when he's like in the hospital? And I just couldn't, I just thought he was, I mean, it was just so weird. I couldn't figure it out. I thought he was being selfish or something. But this was the real MECFS, where he just did not have the energy and we didn't know what it was. And then in about 2000, around that time, he got diagnosed. And we, after having been to so many doctors, and once he was diagnosed, we thought, oh, great, we know what it is. Now we can deal with it. And, and then we gradually discovered that there's no treatments and no cure and no doctors that know what to do at all. So he just kept getting worse and worse until in 2011, he had to move back in with us, which was devastating to him. He was just winning all these awards and so vibrant and, hiking and a super active person. And he really, he'd gone through that individuation thing and he didn't want to come back and live with us. And we had to get a storage shed for all his stuff, move out of his house and his photography studio. And I remember him saying, well, don't buy a storage shed. I'm only going to be here for a few months. And that was in 2011 and he's still here. So after a while, he could still walk when he moved in with us and he could come in and stir fry some food if I cut it up for him. He gradually had to get a wheelchair. He gradually had to just give up all photography whatsoever. He got so that he could only just lay outside on a chaise lounge and me bring the food to him. Then it got so that he couldn't even get out there. Then it got so that he couldn't talk. And then it got so that he couldn't eat. And he got down to 115 pounds again, and he's 6'3". And he was just lay in his bed. And for a little while, he could sit on his floor part of the time, and he developed a hobby of working on high-end headphones for listening to music, and he would improve them and figure out how to take them apart and then send them out, and they'd be amazing. And he could tinker with that sitting on the floor in his room, but then he couldn't do that anymore. He couldn't listen to music. He couldn't use any electronic equipment. He couldn't even look at an iPhone or anything. He was just lying there. He couldn't move. He couldn't do anything. And he got so that he couldn't eat anything. In this picture, you can see he was still eating bananas and some yogurt and a few things, but and that's how thin he was getting. You can see his whole backbone there and how just in despair he is in that place. So then we had to get him a PICC line so that he could get nutrition through his blood. And it would have been better if we'd gotten a J-tube, but he couldn't go to the hospital because he was so fragile that he couldn't have handled, none of the doctors thought he could handle the noise and the interruptions and the way they treat you in a hospital. So we found a place that got him a PICC line and did that for 18 months. And he gradually gained a little weight. This is how bad he got. He would get really bad anxiety and panic attacks. And he was so thin. This is me with him trying to calm him down. And I didn't know that picture was going to be taken, but now I've got a worldwide picture of me and my spaghetti straps. Not my favorite, but it's very telling picture. And that this is another picture of me just trying to help calm him down. And after about 18 months, we realized that he'd gained up to about 140 and he needed a J-tube because you can't do a PICC line for that long and have it be okay. So we now we found a hospital that was very lovely and puts him in an isolation room, and they're really willing to keep it all quiet for him. And he has an ambulance come and put him on a gurney. That's what this picture is. And he has so much pain in his stomach that he has to keep ice on it a lot of the time. So that's what you see strapped onto his stomach. And we also discovered the first time we took him to get a J-tube that we gave him Ativan. The doctor came and gave him Ativan so that he could survive be calm during this trip to the hospital. And when we got to the hospital, we discovered that he was able to communicate a little bit and use Scrabble tiles to spell out things. And while he was gone, Ron discovered that there was mold in his mattress, and we had another mattress ready, but Whitney hadn't wanted to change it. And when he found out that it was moldy, he spelled out in Scrabble tiles, DEFCON 5. And I was so thrilled with that because his sense of humor was there. He hadn't spoken or communicated with us for so long, and there he was with his old sense of humor, and that was lovely. So that was nice, but we could only use Ativan every once in a while because he would habituate to it. So about once a month, we would get to have some interaction with him. And in the meantime, he's in this limbo land of, we didn't even know what was happening. He couldn't move hardly at all. He couldn't communicate, and he couldn't eat. He had pain all the time. And this went on for years. So this is what it was. This is what it is like now when we take him to the hospital, to get his J-tube changed. He's so thrilled to be out in the sun. This is a picture of the first time it wasn't the first time because I see the mask on his face, but this is what happens. And when he gets in the sunlight, he's just so happy to see the sky and the sun and all the plants in the garden that he actually had planted. And this is a picture of Ron with him getting into the ambulance. And this is him in the hospital waiting to get the J-tube changed. And this is just a picture of Ron trying to communicate to him that he loves Whitney, and Whitney's actually pointing to his heart to say, "I love you" back, but he can't even look at Ron. So we didn't, can I go back?
Yeah, just go the other arrow.
Uh-oh,
Yeah,
what is that?
I don't know what you clicked
I
on.
clicked on the wrong thing, oh no.
No.
Is that what you wanted? That one?
No, go back. So in the middle of all this, Ron, who's a very accomplished geneticist and was had a big part in the Human Genome Project and is a biochemist and kind of world famous scientist, is uniquely positioned to try to figure out something like this. And but we didn't know what it was. We'd get all kinds of tests done on Whitney and they would all come out normal. And this is just one reason doctors, don't know what's going on, is that everything looks normal in their routine testing. And then Ron had been working with a company called Metabolon that measures all your metabolites, which is small molecules involved in metabolism. And we got the results from that in 2015, and I watched Ron when he opened it, and he looked at those results and his eyes got big and he just looked at it for like 20 seconds, and it was spatially organized. So it showed all the pathways and it showed what things were high and what things were low. And he just said, "I know what's going on here." And so I'm gonna now take it over to Ron to talk about what's going on here.
Do you want to do People Magazine?
No, People Magazine shouldn't have been next. That's your stuff next. Well, I guess the order doesn't matter that much. So this is skipping ahead a little bit. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to the slide order, but recently we got interviewed. People Magazine got a hold of our book and thought it was an interesting story and interviewed us. And we ended up with this 4-page spread in People Magazine just this last April 12th, which is amazing. I mean, who would have thought that I or Ron would be in People Magazine? I don't even know anybody who buys People Magazine, but they have huge circulation. So it's amazing to have that kind of attention to the disease. This is the second of the 2 pages, which was thrilling to us. And I have to say, just a couple days ago, Ron got a call from some guy in Texas who owned a hardware store that he just retired. And he said that he had read the People Magazine article and he wanted to donate $100,000 to Ron's research, which is amazing and great, of course. And then this is then a little bit before this, Stanford, a science writer at Stanford, had written an article in Stanford Magazine called Medicine Magazine, Stanford Medicine, and it's called The Puzzle Solver. And an agent in New York read that and called her and said that could be a book. So she agreed to write the book, and Ron helped with it, and we made sure all the science and everything was right. So this January, this book came out, which is now led to another donation of $500,000, which is amazing. So I'm going to go back now. This book, I just encourage you to read it. It's a really interesting book, and it just tells the whole story. You'll learn about the disease. It's really well written and easy to read. There's a little of the science in there. There's a really incredible chapter about Ron's childhood, which is super interesting. And you wouldn't have thought that he would end up being a scientist if you read that chapter. So I'm going to go back now to where we discovered that the metabolites were all off, and Ron is going to talk some about the science now and his quest to figure it out.
Okay, thanks, Janet. So of course, the first thing I did after seeing that data, and I was heavily involved in the Genome Project, and so we had a fairly large facility with a lot of automation and a lot of state-of-the-art instrumentation. Many of them we actually built ourselves. So I wrote a grant. I said, what we need to do is just discover what's going on in this disease at all levels. And so it was a fairly large, ambitious grant. And they looked at it and said, well, this is just a fishing expedition. We aren't going to fund that. And I said, we don't know anything about this disease. And that's a good first start. And then you publish it and everybody has a lot of data to make. Oh, no, they said you have to make a hypothesis. So that just represented the first grant that I got turned down. I've written 16 grants. I've gotten one with some colleagues where I get a quarter of the money. And that's the only one I've gotten. I resubmitted, I just submitted another 5 grants, and it's been extremely difficult to get funding to do research here. So all the research that I've been doing is funded by the patients. And it seems just really horrendous to make the patients fund their own research when they in fact can't work. And so it comes in with $5 and $10 donations. So let me just give you I'm not going to go into a lot of the details of the science. I don't think it's necessary, but we just basically put a plan together of what we had to do. We had to find what's called a biomarker, because this disease is diagnosed by symptoms, and that made a lot of doctors not really believe in it. And we needed to show that it had a molecular cause by some methodology. The other thing we would really want to do is to use that data, not just to generate hypotheses and publications, but come up with a treatment that might make them a bit better. But ultimately, we'd love to cure it. It's not clear that it is. When I talk to doctors, they say, well, this is a disease that's a chronic disease. You don't cure chronic diseases, you just treat them. And I said, well, have you ever tried to cure them? And I think the answer is no, because you can't. Anyway, then also prevention is the other thing we'd like to do. But our focus right now is on the treatment and cure. Let me just show you a little bit about the biomarker that we've discovered. And I just wanted to bring in some high-tech technology that is good at Stanford. And this is called a nanoneedle. And it basically is a little nano trough where you put blood in and blood runs down this trough. And in that blood are your immune cells. And those immune cells can settle down on these little electrodes that are here and on both sides. And there's 2,500 of these electrodes per centimeter. So you have a lot of measurements. And then we make measurements 200 times a second. And what this is measuring is the electrical impedance of the immune cells. And what we do is stress the cells. And the whole idea here is that the body doesn't seem to handle stress well. Well, what about the cells? So we stress the cells by adding some salt, and lo and behold, what you see in blue is healthy people. This is just 20 people. We've done a lot more and we get the same thing, but it gets too scattered. And the red is what happens with the patients. And they show a big change in electrical impedance of the cells, which means something in cells have changed because of that stress. And healthy cells can handle it fine. So this is a pretty outstanding diagnostic that something is wrong. It doesn't necessarily say they have ME/CFS. That's a much more difficult thing to test because you have to test a lot of other diseases. So this was the first pass. Incidentally, we've written 3 grants to actually make the small device that other people can use. And all 3 times it was turned down for various reasons. One isn't what they didn't know that we could diagnose the patients accurately. The other time is you don't know the biology behind this. Those are all very, very weak criticisms for something that is so valuable to the community.
One reviewer even said, why should we want to diagnose something when we can't treat it or cure it? And so they wouldn't fund the grant because of that. If you think about that, that's so ridiculous.
Well, that would cover an awful lot of diseases. That if you can't cure them, you don't even diagnose it. So we've been turning now to heavy involvement in trying to understand how we could treat that disease. And we've also been having a lot of discussion with patients. Have they ever tried anything that seems to help and give us some clues? One patient came into the clinic at Stanford that deals with ME/CFS patients and said that she had taken Abilify at low dose and it really helped her. So we worked with the director of that clinic to try it out on 100 other patients. And about 75% of them showed improvement. Now, that's just a good mark for us to then say, okay, what is Abilify doing? It's thought that Abilify either increases or changes susceptibility to dopamine. So now we have done a big deep dive into all the pathways in the body that where dopamine is involved. And of course, what happens is there's a lot of things going on in the body in addition to what dopamine may be changed, but other components as well. For example, there may be ammonia being produced, which is highly toxic. So that has led us to come up with some new hypotheses as to where we could, in fact, come up with maybe some new treatments. We're also trying to figure out what could be the cause. And the basic idea here is that there probably is something in the metabolism that has been changed that is very difficult to reset for the patients. So normally what happens when you get like a cold, your body reacts and then it goes back to normal. So there's something going on that prevents the body from going back to normal. So it's some kind of block. One of our hypotheses is there's something we call a metabolic trap, where the metabolism gets into a point where the actual alterations in the metabolism actually cause the alterations. And so that's a vicious cycle that you can't then get out of unless you perturb the trap. So we have one of them that makes a lot of sense. It's involving tryptophan. And we looked at that because when you get an infection and an infection causes this disease, tryptophan is large amounts of tryptophan is imported. So we're hopeful that we can actually come up with some decent treatments and maybe even a cure for this disease. And when I talk about this, a lot of times to physicians, they kind of shake their head, you don't cure these diseases. And I think it's a real mistake to think that you can't. And there's a lot of chronic diseases out there, and I think they need to be funded. And the problem with NIH is that they have this mentality of, oh, you do a hypothesis and then you test it and then you publish it, and then you go and make a new hypothesis. It's not at all focused on treatment or even curing diseases. It's focused on publishing papers. And in fact, I told the NIH they should change their name from the National Institutes of Health to the National Institute of Medical Publications, because that's their focus and that's their test. And so I'd like to try to change the way we think about disease. And I'm working heavily to try to do that. Thank you.
So I'd like to say that this metabolic trap is really interesting, and I wish I could explain it in a simple way, which if somebody in the question wants to hear that, we can, but we don't have enough time. I'm not going to do that right now, but it's quite interesting. But what I want to talk about at the end here is that Whitney, Abilify is normally used for schizophrenia and other severe mental health issues, but the dose is like 30 milligrams or high. And what's been discovered that at low doses, Abilify helps these patients. And so Whitney started at 0.25 milligrams of Abilify and gradually went up really slowly to hit 2 milligrams, which is the max that they're recommending, because they found that the side effects start happening more when you get higher. And after a couple of months of being on that, he started noticing a little bit of difference. So this is amazing because we've tried hundreds of things. We've tried antivirals, we've tried everything out there that has been suggested for ME/CFS, except we didn't try cell reduce that was recommended by the medical medium guy. But we've tried a lot of things, and so you kind of stop hoping after a while, or you're afraid to hope. But he said after a couple months that he felt a little bit better from Abilify, so we just kept going, and gradually he got so that he texted me, which was amazing. I hadn't had any communication from him for years, and he texted me, and then gradually he got so that he could he would pantomime these things, and got Ashley, our daughter, to make a Facebook page for him, and he started pantomiming things that we would write down, and he'd get it on Facebook, and then he got so that he could type them, and he's now using a MacBook Air, and he can type, and he's got these amazing Facebook posts with insights into not only his disease, but about how he's coped with it. It's like he's become this wise, kind of enlightened person through this experience. And he has a website, which is whitneydafo.com. And those things are all on the website, along with his photographs. And they're really amazing to read. I can't recommend them more highly. And some of them are long, and the fact that he couldn't even look at an iPhone or look at me with a shirt with a pattern on it or anything, and now he's writing all this stuff. And then there was a guy who's an editor for a journal. There's a journal called Healthcare that is making a special issue on severe ME/CFS, which has hardly been written about at all, because these people are just stuck at home and they don't even go to the doctor. And most of the specialists don't even know very much about what to do about it or what it's like. And he thought that it would be great if Whitney could put these blogs together and create an article for this issue. So long story short, Whitney has done that. And it was really hard for him to spend that much energy. But that article has now been published and in a peer-reviewed journal called Healthcare. And I did send Art the link to it to put in the chat. It's very heart-wrenching and detailed about what it's been like for him to not be able to communicate or even move or even have his brain work. And he has amazing like insights and observations about how he coped with that. And that's in that article. And this is quite wonderful because it also means that people can cite this article when they're talking about the disease, and when doctors are trying to put patients in mental hospitals because they can't eat and they think they're anorexic and they're trying to involuntarily commit them to psych wards, they can use this paper. In addition, it's peer reviewed, right? So they can use this paper to help explain what's going on with the patients and that they shouldn't be in a psych ward. I know that sounds drastic, but that happens quite often, especially in Europe. And and I've gotten very involved in advocating for the patients and establishing relationships all over social media with a lot of the patients and trying to help them talk to their doctors, help them figure out what to send to their doctors that will help educate them, because most doctors don't know what to do. I just had a message from somebody recently who's wanted to get ketamine for pain, and the doctor said, you need physical therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, and you're just looking too much at the biomedical model, and really it's psychosomatic. And it's so devastating when that happens, when you have a real physical disease. So this article is really going to help, and the book is really going to help. And I really appreciate being able to tell you about this, and I appreciate your interest. And we're totally open to any questions of things you'd like us to expand on, or any kind of personal thing. You can imagine I've had to quit my career to care for him, which is very difficult. And it's been really difficult. A lot of our friends we don't have anymore because I don't know, I guess they don't know what to talk about with us or something. But it's just been really hard. I've gone through a lot of depression about it, and I'm doing a little bit better now, but it's definitely not what we expected in life. But it got given to us, and we picked it up, and we are now probably the most well-known people in the world working on this disease and advocating for it and researching it. So Ron and I and Whitney and his sister also. So who knew that I'd get to be famous for this reason and be called the mother of ME/CFS.
Janet, I want to thank you. We've got actually a lineup here of people.
Okay, so go ahead.
If you could unshare your screen so we get you back up on the screen.
Okay, unshare it, Mr. Tech.
Stop share screen. Should have the option at the top of your
Get up
screen.
at the top, go up here. You are screen sharing, stop share. Oh, hi.
Okay. So Bruce Pfeiffer, first question.
Janet and Ron, I applaud your efforts to find a cure. And I'm really sorry that you had to experience the negativity from people who dismiss this as a chronic disease, and how could you find a cure for it? At the same time, rather than or as an alternative or as an augment treating symptoms, I'm wondering if you couldn't use science to help to manage and treat some of the other targets that that could improve the quality of life for someone with this disease. And, I'm just going to throw out something off the top of my head, which is something that came to me from some of the work that I've been doing, which is, where the certain aspects of the disease might have some commonalities with other chronic diseases. I found that, again, just as an example, tightening up the schedule of the person with respect to meals and sleep to help entrain the circadian rhythms, which are sometimes out of whack. As a matter of fact, sometimes the genes that govern the circadian rhythms can get out of whack. And I'm just offering the possibility that there are other things that may be in common with other conditions where either there are known targets or other similarities that could help manage and improve the quality of life.
So I, of course, we're highly educated, medically pretty aware people, and we've tried everything imaginable. And the standard of care right now is to treat the symptoms that people have. They have POTS, which is orthostatic intolerance. They have sleep issues. They have pain. They have cognitive brain fog. They have GI issues. They have a lot of things. And the best CFS doctors focus on those symptoms and try to help them feel better in some way. But there isn't any way to cure it. And of course, having a sleep hygiene is a good idea. But I have to say that this disease is so far beyond, something is regulating what's going on with their sleep that isn't very amenable to putting any kind of limits or sleep schedules on it. And believe me, we've tried that, but doesn't have much effect. Some people take some sleep aids, and some people can't tolerate those, or it doesn't help. Unrefreshing sleep is a very common symptom where they sleep, but when they wake up, they don't feel like they've slept at all. And so it's a really very good question, like, what do you do when you have patients like that? And the answer is, like you suggested, is treat the symptoms and diagnose as many of those symptoms as you can, because it helps get the person disability and credibility, and it helps them get paid for their treatments by insurance, because often you can't get any of that if you just have a ME/CFS diagnosis. So thank you.
The patients often switch their night-day cycle. So they are asleep in the daytime and are up all night. And they sometimes push themselves to go back to their normal cycle, and then they gradually go back into the altered cycle. There's a disease called sleeping sickness that's caused by a trypanosome in Africa. It's called sleeping sickness because that's exactly what they do too. And so there's something that happens with an infection of this type or this disease type that causes you to switch that in your circadian rhythm. So it's actually probably putting a lot of pressure on them to try to get them to change. So we've learned just to kind of go with what is there and not try to make them do something.
So Ellen,
Hey, Ellen.
like to make.
Hi.
Hi.
Wow.
Wow, this was great. I want to just kind of reiterate what I put in the chat, that I read the book and I was so blown away by what a heartbreaking experience it's been, and also how hopeful. And I'm also a Facebook friend, so I see responses to your posts about some, latest development. And what I get is the book subtitle said something about saving your son. I can't remember what the subtitle is, but there's thousands of people all over the world, and they are really so indebted and so grateful to the work that you're doing, Ron, that you are working, of course, for Whitney. You're working for so many other people.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, there's about 1% of the population has this. Probably all over the world. And
Wow.
we're probably going to get another 1% with the COVID-19.
What is that about? What's the,
Well, if you
connection
look at the
to the virus?
symptoms of what's called COVID long haulers, uh, they don't profess this, but you look at the symptoms are the same as ME/CFS. And we know that this disease is caused from a viral infection and not just the Epstein-Barr virus, which causes mononucleosis, which is common in the US, but many viruses can do this. And there's a lot of them aren't studied in terms of what the frequency is, but it's about 10%.
10% of people who get other viruses end up with ME/CFS.
Wow.
So if you want to tell young people to go get vaccinated, it's because it's like having a gun with 10 chambers in it, and you put one bullet in it, put it at your head and pull the trigger. Because if you get this disease right now, this is the rest of your life.
Wow. Wow. That's.
So Stanford is estimating from their COVID patients that 30% of them have long COVID symptoms. And we don't know what that is going to be in the long term, but the virus goes away and you still have these symptoms. So whatever's gotten triggered has caused ME/CFS. And Ron has submitted a couple grants to study this at the deep level, biochemical level, to try to see the conversion of COVID to whatever the long haul thing is, which may be ME/CFS, and those grants have all been turned down. But NIH is really just, I mean, I don't think I can, like, you would have to censor me if I said what I think about NIH about this. And Francis Collins is all nicey nice when he talks about it, but he doesn't come through with any money.
Wow.
And I have to say, he'll say, well, we fund good grants, but we don't get any good grants. Well, just tell me that Ron Davis doesn't submit good grants to NIH. That's ridiculous. And there's something wrong with the reviewing system there, because the reviews are really incompetent and say stupid things. So
And often very derogatory.
yeah, it's just so they define it as not a good grant, and then Francis Collins says, well, if we got good grants, we'd fund it. So they've got themselves, a nice little out for not funding it. And we think that they don't believe in it or something. And
It only takes one reviewer to kill your grant. So there's a lot of doctors and scientists that believe this is a psychosomatic disease. You get one of those on your review panel, you're never going to get a grant.
Wow.
when we tried to get Whitney the J-tube, the surgeon at Stanford said the J-tube won't help him. What he needs is intensive psychiatric intervention.
Mm.
When we tried to get him to investigate MALS, which is medium arcuate ligament syndrome, this is something where your vascular system gets blocked, and so the blood doesn't flow to your stomach and it causes stomach pain. The guy said that he wouldn't even consider it. He never heard of ME. He didn't know anything about ME/CFS, and he'd never heard about MALS. And he referred Whitney to the pain clinic and a psychologist, psychiatrist, and a physical therapist. And there are whole clinics that do MALS and surgery at the Mayo Clinic and in New York. But to figure that out, we'd have to go to New York. So that's the maltreatment that happens for these patients is horrendous.
Ellen, thank you so much. I've got a note here from Nancy Sosnoff. Is that I'd like to hear the part Janet said she didn't have time to tell us. Nancy, do you have anything you want to amplify, or is that the essence of it?
You want to hear about the metabolic trap? So you might prefer to hear it from Ron, but it's a little hard for Ron to explain this in lay person's terms. So is it okay if I try?
Yeah, go ahead.
Nancy, are you there?
Nancy Sosnoff. Hi, Nancy.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, hi.
Is that what you want?
Thanks for doing this, you guys.
So is that what you wanted to hear about, Nancy, is the metabolic trap?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so normally in a body, there's a gene called IDO1 that processes tryptophan, and tryptophan gets processed into kynurenine, which goes to NAD, which goes to ATP, which is the energy in your mitochondria. And normally that works just fine, but if you get too much tryptophan, that gene stops working. It's called substrate inhibited. It's kind of unusual. And then the tryptophan just goes up and up and up if nothing else happened. In healthy people, there's another gene called IDO2, which takes over and processes the kynurenine, no, the tryptophan into kynurenine, and it all works fine. But in every patient that they have tested the genetics of, the IDO2 gene has mutations which make it not functional. So in those patients, the tryptophan is high, the kynurenine is low, and they don't get NAD or ATP. And this has all been modeled out, but they haven't been able to do the measurements of all these chemicals because it's really, really hard to measure. And it requires a mass spectrometer, and Ron doesn't have the money to have a mass spectrometer in his lab, and he has to use Mike Snyder's and genetics, and it's just complicated. So Ron is the master of yeast genetics. He's sequenced yeast. He's developed most of the procedures for investigating yeast in his career. And so he's taken Baker's yeast and he's knocked down all the genes that make NAD, and he's put in the IDO1 gene, the human IDO1 gene, into yeast. And then he adds tryptophan. The yeast grows just fine. There's NAD, everything's fine. And then as they add tryptophan and it gets too high, all of a sudden the yeast won't grow anymore and there's no NAD. So they've basically demonstrated the metabolic trap in yeast. And they're now trying to demonstrate it in human cells also. But what the yeast thing means is that they're going to be able to try drugs on this and see if they can turn it around, give it the high tryptophan and put some drugs in there. And the benefit of this is they have every drug that's approved by the FDA in their freezers at the lab. Drops of the drug, and it makes a concentric circle of concentrations, right? So they can look at what concentration things happen in the yeast, like when it stops growing or when it starts growing again. And so they're working on doing that right now to see if they can find a drug or a natural supplement that can actually turn that metabolic trap around. They're hoping to find one because if they find some kind of chemical that does it that isn't an approved drug already, it will take the FDA 10 or 20 years, clinical trials and stuff to get it approved. And he's hoping to find something that could be used right away.
So this IDO1 gene, when it's active, can consume tryptophan at a phenomenal rate. So we're working with a guy that does modeling of pathways, and he says that if we found a drug that could reactivate the IDO1 gene, if what's going on that's wrong, that you could take this drug in the evening, in the morning you wake up, you'll be cured.
Wow.
That is not a good drug for pharmaceuticals.
Wow.
On that note,
Meaning they won't get much profit if they.
You sell each patient one pill.
Wow.
that note of possibility, I think we're going to call it to close. We're reaching the end of our time and everybody's hungry. So thank you, Ron and Janet. And I'm going to do what we've done before. I'm going to ask everybody to unmute, please. Screen, everybody unmute.
Already.
It's there. And for 15 seconds, make a lot of noise and say thank you to Ron and Dave.
Chirp, chirp, thank you. Chirp.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bravo, bravo.
You have a half an hour now before the first sharing session starts. And then the 3 o'clock, again, to remind you, you get in through the Hangouts link in the lounge. Tomorrow morning at 9, Gabby Starr will have a special half hour with us. And then we lead off with our first program of the morning with Lance Lang. So hope to see you this afternoon and tomorrow. And thanks again, Ron and Janet.
Thank you, Art.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art.
The next sharing session will be on Zoom, however. From 1 to 3, we're on Zoom back at this location.
Oh, well then.
Look, there's 47 people on here right now.
Yep.
Ha! Yay.
We'll see if
I
they get
very
hungry.
Grab a bite of lunch and be back by 1.
And
Thanks, Art.
Okay, Guy, you
Thank you,
are
Art.
host. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, I'm host. Thank you, Art.
So
Janet and Ron, that was amazing. And just kudos for your persistence and wisdom in all this.
Thanks. Who's that talking?
Barbara.
Rogoff?
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Barbara. Wow, I haven't talked to you in ages and you're so close.
Yeah.
And, this is Phil and Janet and Ron. I am just so warmed, thrilled, glad that you finally have found some help after this long tenure thing, that Putin is getting some relief, had some improvement, been able to communicate better. And I'm so happy.
Yeah, it's nice that he's better. It's also,
Yeah.
you still can't talk or eat, so it's also still really hard, both.
Yeah. And as I commented through the chat, in my pharma job about 10 years ago, I did a lot of work on CNS systems involving dopamine, schizophrenia, and stuff. And so when Ron started talking about Abilify and Ativan, I immediately cued on the dopamine dysregulation hypothesis, and looks like a good track there. And now that I have a little bit of consulting income, we'll publicly pledge to give a small amount of it to your crowdfunding.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you so much.
To the extent that I keep being paid by my consulting job.
My birthday's coming up and I put a Facebook fundraiser on Facebook
Yeah.
because Ron needs a centrifuge in his lab because his centrifuge are crapping out. And in 2 days, we got way over 100 donations and got like $11,000, which is enough to buy him a new centrifuge. Just from these patient donations of all the way down to $7, some of them 100, 250, but lots and lots of $24, $37. These are people who are on disability and they send a little bit. It's amazing. It's so inspiring, these people. I've met so many amazing people connecting with these patients. So he's getting a new centrifuge.
Yeah.
Hi, Janet. It's Roger Rippenberg. Haven't seen you for a while.
No, hi.
Where would one contribute?
You can contribute at the Stanford Genome Technology Center at Stanford, which has a donate button. And when you go in there, you have to make sure it says that there's a box where you select Stanford Medicine. I think it's medicine or medical school or something. And then there's another box where it says to who, and then you put Ron Davis in that box and with the Stanford Genome Technology Center in that box. The other place you can donate is the Open Medicine Foundation, which is omf.ngo. Ron's the head of the scientific advisory board there. And that money goes to Ron's research and other people's research that he knows is good for this disease.
And your personal Facebook page has info as well?
There's all kinds of stuff on my Facebook page. It's just Janet Dafoe. And Whitney has a Facebook page, Whitney Dafoe, and a website, whitneydafoe.com. Whitney's also got an Instagram account now that he's able to take pictures with his iPhone. And he's putting a picture up almost every day, trying to just make a chronology of what this disease is like. So it's got painful pictures and happy pictures and pictures of the pumping the food